Daniel dropped the note on the kitchen counter like it was nothing. 8 years. Gone in 2 sentences. I'm not ready to be a father. Don't contact me. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, grocery bags slipping from her fingers, watching the man she loved walk out with a suitcase in each hand. He didn't look back. Not once. 5 months pregnant, $47 in her account, and the door slammed shut behind him like a period at the end of their story. But this isn't where Sarah's story ends. This is where it begins. In her mother's forgotten house, secrets waited. Secrets that would change everything she believed about love, about family, about the man who abandoned her before she was old enough to remember his face. If you want to see how one woman's worst day became her greatest discovery, subscribe now and stay until the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels tonight. The eviction notice had given her 72 hours. Sarah Mitchell stood on the sidewalk outside her Boston apartment, reading the paper for the 3rd time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. Behind her, movers carried furniture she couldn't afford to store into a truck she couldn't afford to rent. Her phone rang. Daniel's mother. I heard what happened, Patricia said, her voice carrying that particular blend of sympathy and satisfaction that only a mother-in-law could perfect. I want you to know that Daniel is staying with us. He needs time to process. Sarah laughed. It came out broken. He needs time to process I'm the one who's pregnant. I'm the one who just lost everything. Well? A pause. Perhaps if you'd been more understanding of his needs. Sarah hung up. She stood there on that sidewalk, hand pressed against her swollen belly, watching strangers dismantle 8 years of her life and load it into a truck. A woman walked past with a stroller, throwing Sarah a pitying glance. A businessman stepped around her like she was an obstacle on his path to somewhere important. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if she was okay. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. My lawyer will be in touch about relinquishing parental rights. Please don't make this difficult. Relinquishing parental rights. Like their daughter was a lease he was breaking. Like the baby growing inside her was an inconvenience to be legally documented and filed away. Sarah's hands shook as she typed back, "You're a coward." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then nothing. She called her best friend Melissa. Voicemail. She called her college roommate Janet. The number had been disconnected. She scrolled through her contacts name after name and realized with growing horror that every close friend she had was actually Daniel's friend first. His work colleagues' wives, his college buddies' girlfriends. A social circle built around him like planets orbiting a sun, and now that sun had collapsed, taking everything with it. She had no one. Then her thumb stopped on a name she'd almost forgotten was there. Eleanor Chambers, her mother's neighbor from Vermont. The woman who'd called 3 years ago to tell her that her mother had passed, that she'd been there at the end, that Margaret Mitchell had died holding Eleanor's hand because her own daughter was 200 miles away and too busy to answer the phone. Sarah hadn't spoken to Eleanor since the funeral, hadn't been able to face the guilt. She called anyway. Eleanor answered on the second ring. "Sarah, is that you?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I didn't know who else to call." Silence on the other end. Then softly, "Tell me what happened." So Sarah told her. Everything. Daniel leaving. The eviction. The pregnancy. The $47. The complete and total collapse of a life she thought she'd built on solid ground. When she finished, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother's house is still standing," she said finally. "I've been keeping an eye on it. Figured you'd come back eventually." "I can't," Sarah started. "You can. The house is yours. Margaret made sure of that. She fought the bank for 2 years to make sure you'd have a place to come home to." Sarah closed her eyes. She remembered the house. The Victorian on the hill, with the wraparound porch. The garden her mother had tended like it was a child. The kitchen that always smelled like baking. She also remembered the fights. The screaming matches during her teenage years. The cold silence that had stretched between them for months after she moved to Boston. The phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent. The guilt that had kept her away even when her mother was dying. "I haven't been back since the funeral," Sarah said. "I know. I was supposed to clean it out, sell it. I know that too." "Tom?" Eleanor's voice was gentle. "But the house is still there. And from the sound of it, you need somewhere to be." Sarah looked at the moving truck, now fully loaded, with a life that no longer existed. She looked at the eviction notice crumpled in her fist. She looked down at her belly, where her daughter kicked as if to say, "What are you waiting for?" "I'll be there tomorrow," she said. The drive took 4 hours. Sarah's old Honda wheezed up I-89 past ski resorts and dairy farms, and the kind of small towns that looked like postcards. She'd made this drive dozens of times as a younger woman, watching the landscape shift from urban concrete to rolling green hills. But that was before. Before Boston. Before Daniel. Before she'd convinced herself that Vermont was something she'd outgrown. Now, with her whole life crammed into the back seat, the familiar mountains felt less like coming home and more like admitting defeat. She stopped for gas in a town called Randolph. While the pump ran, she stood beside her car and stretched her aching back. A woman at the next pump, gray-haired, wearing overalls, smiled at her. "How far along?" Sarah blinked. "What?" "The baby." The woman nodded toward her stomach. "You've got that 5th-month look. I had 4 myself. I know the posture." "Oh," Sarah managed to smile. 5 months, yeah? First one? Yes. Father excited? The question hit Sarah like a slap. She must have flinched because the woman's expression shifted to concern. "I'm sorry, the woman said quickly. "None of my business." "No, it's..." Sarah stopped. What was she supposed to say? "The father left, drove away 3 days ago, left a note on the counter like I was a roommate he was tired of living with." The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her truck and pulled out a business card. "My daughter runs a support group in Montpelier," she said, "for single mothers, meets every Tuesday. You might think about stopping by." Sarah took the card. "Thank you." "Men disappoint us," the woman said. "That's what they do, but babies are something else entirely. You'll see." She drove away, leaving Sarah standing at the pump with a business card and the strange comfort of a stranger's kindness. The house appeared at the end of a dirt road, crouched among overgrown maples like something embarrassed to be seen. Sarah pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring through the windshield at what remained of her childhood. The Victorian looked exhausted. Paint peeled from the clapboards in long, defeated strips. The porch sagged in the middle, its railings missing spindles like gaps in an old man's smile. The garden had transformed into a wilderness, rose bushes growing wild, their thorns tangled with weeds. But the bones were still there. The steep gabled roof. The bay window where her mother used to sit reading on Sunday mornings. The chimney that had pumped out wood smoke every winter, filling the valley with the smell of burning pine. Sarah's throat tightened. She got out of the car. The October air hit her face sharp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood fires. A crow called from somewhere in the trees. The silence of the countryside pressed in around her, so different from Boston's constant noise that it felt almost hostile. The key was under the mat, same place her mother had always kept it despite Sarah's teenage insistence that it wasn't safe. "This is Montpelier," her mother had always said. "Not the big city. We trust each other here." Sarah picked up the key. Her hands were trembling. She climbed the porch steps, testing each one before putting her full weight on it. The boards groaned but held. At the door, she paused, key raised suddenly, unable to make herself go in. 3 years. 3 years since she'd stood in this spot helping carry her mother's casket to the hearse. 3 years since she'd fled back to Boston, to Daniel, to a life that felt safe because it was far away from everything that reminded her of what she'd lost, what she'd abandoned. "You came." Sarah spun around. Eleanor Chambers stood at the edge of the porch, having appeared without a month. She was older than Sarah remembered, 80 now at least, but her eyes were still sharp, still assessing. "The house knew you'd come back," Eleanor said. "It's been waiting." Sarah tried to smile. "Houses don't wait." "This one does." Eleanor climbed the steps, slowly holding the railing. "Your mother always said so, said the house had a memory, said it kept things until people were ready to find them. My mother said a lot of things." "She did." Eleanor stopped beside Sarah, studying her face. "You look like her. Same stubborn chin, same tired eyes." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Eleanor reached past her and pushed the door open. It swung inward with a creak that seemed to come from the house itself, a long exhale of stale air and old memories. "Go on," Eleanor said. "It's your home now. Has been for 3 years, even if you weren't here to claim it." Sarah stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Lavender and dust, and something underneath, something sweet and familiar that she couldn't quite name. Her mother's perfume. Chanel No. 5 applied sparingly because money was always tight. 3 years dead and the ghost of it still lingered. Dust motes swirled in the light from the open door. White sheets covered the furniture, turning the living room into a landscape of pale hills and valleys. The grandfather clock in the hallway stood silent, its pendulum still. Sarah moved deeper into the house, Eleanor following a few steps behind. The kitchen stopped her. A calendar hung on the wall, forever frozen on March, the month her mother was hospitalized. A coffee cup sat on the counter, a dark ring at the bottom. The dish rack held a single plate, a single fork, a single glass. Evidence of meals eaten alone, day after day after day. "She called you," Eleanor said quietly. "That last month. She called you every Sunday, same as always." Sarah's chest tightened. "I know." "Did you call her back?" The question hung in the air. "I was busy," Sarah said. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "I was always busy. Work, Daniel. I kept meaning to. She knew you were busy." Eleanor moved past her, running a finger along the dusty counter. "She told me so. Said you had a good life up there in Boston. Said she didn't want to be a burden." Sarah closed her eyes. "She was never a burden." "No, she wasn't." Eleanor's voice hardened slightly. "But she died alone, Sarah. I was there, but I wasn't her daughter. I was just the neighbor." The words landed like blows. Sarah felt her knees weaken, caught herself on the counter's edge. "I didn't know she was sick," she whispered. "She never told me. She didn't tell you because she knew you'd feel obligated to come. And she didn't want obligation. She wanted you to want to come." Eleanor opened the refrigerator, empty, unplugged, and pulled out a note that had been taped to the inside door. She handed it to Sarah. The handwriting was her mother's. Shaky, the letters uneven, written by a hand that was losing its strength. "Clean me out, Bertie. I didn't want you to deal with rotten food on top of everything else. Love, Mom." Bertie, her mother's nickname for her since she was small, because she used to chirp instead of cry. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, the note clutched in her hand. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside her, a well of grief she'd been ignoring for 3 years. She cried for her mother, for herself, for the baby who would never know its grandmother, for all the phone calls she didn't return, all the visits she didn't make, all the words she left unsaid. Eleanor stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, just present, a witness to the collapse Sarah had been delaying since the funeral. When the sobs finally slowed, Eleanor spoke. "There's more," she said. "Things your mother left, things she wanted you to find." Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand. "What things?" "That's not for me to say. The house will show you. It showed your mother plenty after your grandmother passed, and it showed your grandmother after hers." "You make it sound alive." "Maybe it is." Eleanor reached down and helped Sarah to her feet. "I've lived next door for 43 years. I've seen things in this house that I can't explain. Heard things, too. Your mother used to say the walls had memories. I thought she was being poetic. Now I'm not so sure." She handed Sarah a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Chicken and rice. You need to eat. The baby needs you strong." Then she was gone, leaving Sarah alone in a house full of ghosts. Sarah didn't sleep that first night. She wandered from room to room, pulling sheets off furniture, opening closets, running her fingers along surfaces her mother had touched. Every item was a memory. The green velvet reading chair worn thin on the armrests. The bookshelf organized by color, because her mother believed homes should be beautiful even when money was ugly. The fireplace mantel lined with photographs in tarnished frames. She picked up the nearest photo. Her 5th birthday. Paper crown on her head, chocolate cake on her face, and her mother laughing, actually laughing, with a joy that Sarah barely recognized. When had she last seen her mother happy, like that? Really happy, she couldn't remember. The baby kicked, startling her. She pressed her hand to her belly and felt the movement beneath her palm. A tiny foot, maybe. A tiny fist. "I know," she said aloud. "I miss her too." G'him. The house creaked around her settling, she told herself. Just the old bones adjusting to the October cold. But the creak sounded almost like an answer. She found her mother's bedroom just after midnight. The door had been closed, and Sarah had been avoiding it all evening, saving it for last, like a child saving the frosting on a birthday cake. Now, with the rest of the house explored, she had no more excuses. The handle was cool under her palm. She turned it slowly, holding her breath. The room was different from the rest of the house. Cleaner. More recently touched. The bed was made with fresh sheets. The windows were clean. On the nightstand sat a framed photograph and a stack of letters tied with ribbon. Someone had been taking care of this room, preparing it. Sarah crossed to the nightstand and picked up the photograph. Her college graduation. She was in her cap and gown, and her mother's arm was around her shoulders. Both of them were smiling, but Sarah remembered the fight they'd had that morning. Something about Daniel, about Sarah's choice to stay in Boston instead of coming home. Her mother had smiled anyway, had posed for the photo anyway, had hidden her disappointment behind pride because that's what mothers did. Sarah set the photo down and picked up the letters. The first envelope was addressed in her own handwriting, letters she'd sent during college, letters she assumed her mother had thrown away during one of their arguments, but her mother had kept every single one. Sarah sank onto the bed, letters spilling across her lap. There had to be 30 of them. 40. Notes scribbled on postcards, long rambling pages about classes and parties and boys who didn't matter. A whole chronicle of a daughter's life, preserved and protected. "You never told me," Sarah whispered to the empty room. "You never said you kept these." The house creaked again. This time it sounded almost like forgiveness. The morning brought Eleanor carrying fresh eggs and a determined expression. "You look terrible," she said, pushing past Sarah into the kitchen. "When did you eat last?" Sarah tried to remember. The gas station, a bag of chips from a vending machine somewhere on I-89. "I'm not hungry." "The baby is." Eleanor was already cracking eggs into a bowl, moving around the kitchen with the familiarity of someone who'd done this many times before. "Sit, I'll make breakfast." Sarah sat. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. The letters, the photograph, the note in the refrigerator. Every discovery opened new questions. "How long did you know my mother?" she asked. 43 years. Eleanor whisked the eggs with practiced efficiency. "Moved in next door when your grandmother was still alive. This was during the hard times, you understand. Your grandfather had just passed. Your mother was trying to raise you alone." Sarah frowned. "My father left when I was 3. "Left." Eleanor's voice carried an edge. "That's one word for it." "What's another word?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, focused on the eggs. Then she sighed. "There are things in this house, Sarah. Things your mother left for you to find. I'm not going to spoil them. That's not my place. But when you find them, and you will try to understand, things weren't always what they seemed." "You're being cryptic." "I'm being careful." Eleanor slid the eggs onto a plate and set it in front of Sarah. "Your mother made me promise to let the house do the telling. She said it would know when you were ready." "Ready for what?" Eleanor smiled, but there was sadness in it. To learn who she really was. The recipe book surfaced on the 3rd day. Sarah found it in the cabinet above the stove, hidden behind cans of expired soup and ancient bags of flour. The leather cover was cracked and stained. The pages soft from decades of handling. "Margaret's Kitchen," read the embossed title. Sarah carried it to the kitchen table. She'd gotten the power restored yesterday, and real light made everything feel slightly less haunted, and began to flip through. Every page was annotated in her mother's looping script. "Double the vanilla. Best served warm. Sarah's favorite make on bad days." Halfway through, she found the recipe for peanut butter cookies. The page was more worn than any other edges, soft-spotted with ancient ingredients. A note at the bottom, "Made these the day we brought Sarah home from the hospital. She was so small. I ate an entire batch by myself while she slept in her bassinet. I'll make them again when she brings her own children home. I hope I'm there." Sarah touched her belly, where the baby shifted restlessly. "You planned for this," she said to her mother's ghost. "You knew I'd come back. You knew I'd need this." That night she baked the cookies. The old wood-burning stove took an hour to figure out she had to call Eleanor for instructions, listening carefully as the older woman walked her through the process of lighting kindling and adjusting the damper. But finally the kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of peanut butter and brown sugar. She ate the entire batch, just like her mother had 30 years ago. And in the quiet darkness, surrounded by the scent of baking, she could have sworn she heard humming. Her mother's lullaby, the one she'd sung every night until Sarah was too old for such things. The baby kicked hard enough to make her gasp. "I hear her too," Sarah whispered. "I hear her too." The bills surfaced on the 5th day. Sarah was cleaning out her mother's study, a small room barely bigger than a closet, when she found the stacks. Neatly labeled, organized by category, hidden behind smiling photographs and cheerful knickknacks. Hospital invoices, chemotherapy charges, pharmacy receipts. The total scrawled at the bottom of a yellow legal pad, $127, $458. Her mother had been dying for 2 years before telling Sarah. 2 years of treatments and tests and pain, all hidden behind phone calls about weather and garden updates and questions about Daniel. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah wanted to scream. "Why didn't you let me help?" But she knew why. Because she hadn't wanted to know. Because she'd been too busy with her own life, her own problems, her own carefully constructed happiness to make room for her mother's suffering. because it was easier to stay away. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over, hands braced on the desk, struggling to breathe. Then she found the budget ledger, a composition notebook pages filled with her mother's careful handwriting. Every expense recorded to the penny. Groceries 34,052s. Electricity 78,90. Medication cut in half to last longer. And on every page, 2 lines untouched: Sarah's birthday fund, $2,500. Sarah's Christmas fund, $2,500. Her mother had been choosing between food and medicine, cutting doses to make prescriptions last, watching her own body fail while carefully setting aside $50 a month for a daughter who rarely called and never visited. The margins held small notes: stretch every dollar. Stay grateful. Love Sarah more than fear tomorrow. Sarah wept until she had nothing left. Then she kept reading. The letters came on the 7th day. Sarah found the brass key behind a loose baseboard in her mother's bedroom. It led to a hidden drawer in an antique writing desk, and inside lay a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. Each envelope was addressed to the same man, William Mitchell, her father, the man who'd vanished when she was 3. The first letter was dated 25 years ago. Dear William, it's been 3 months since you left. Sarah asks for you every night before bed. I've run out of ways to explain why her daddy doesn't come home. If you ever read this, know that she has your eyes. Know that I'm raising her to be better than both of us. Love always, Margaret. Sarah read letter after letter. Her mother had chronicled everything. First dance recitals, lost teeth, spelling bees, heartbreaks. 20 years of a daughter's life written to a man who never answered. Then she found a letter dated 10 years ago. Dear William, your sister called today. She told me you're gone. Heart attack, alone in Montana. They found you 3 days later. How do I tell Sarah? She stopped asking about you years ago, but I see it sometimes. That absence. That hollow space where you should have been. Maybe I won't tell her. Maybe some wounds don't need salt. I'm still angry with you. I'll be angry forever. But you gave me Sarah. Whatever else you took. Margaret. Sarah set the letter down. Her hands were shaking. Her father hadn't abandoned them. He'd died, alone, and her mother had never told her. She kept reading. Even after William's death, the letters continued. Her mother had kept writing to his ghost, sharing joys and sorrows with a man who would never read them. The final letter was dated 2 weeks before her mother died. Dear Sarah, yes, I'm writing to you now. I know about the baby. Eleanor saw you at the pharmacy in Burlington. Prenatal vitamins. Crying in the parking lot. I wanted to call. I wanted to come hold you and tell you everything would be okay, but my body won't cooperate anymore, and I didn't want you to see me like this thin and gray and fading, so instead I've been preparing. The attic is full of things for you. The house is paid off. You'll have a home. You'll have a place to bring my grandchild. I'm so sorry I won't be there, but you won't be truly alone. You have the house. You have the community. You have a line of Mitchell women behind you, generations of us bending but never breaking. I love you, Bertie. I loved you from the moment I felt you kick. I'll love you after I'm gone. Take care of my grandchild. Tell her about me. All my love, Mom. Sarah read the letter 3 times. Her mother had known. About Daniel. About the baby. About everything. And she had spent her dying months making sure Sarah would have a home. The phone rang at midnight on the 8th day. Sarah was asleep on the couch, too exhausted to make it upstairs when the shrill sound jolted her awake. She fumbled for her phone, squinting at the screen. Daniel. She considered not answering. Her finger hovered over the decline button, ready to send him to voicemail, like he deserved. But something made her accept the call. Sarah. His voice was strange. Tight. I need to talk to you. So talk. Not on the phone. He paused. I'm in Vermont. I'm outside. Sarah's blood went cold. She crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain. A car sat at the end of the driveway, headlights cutting through the darkness. She could see a figure behind the wheel phone pressed to his ear. What are you doing here, Daniel? My mother told me where you were. I need to explain some things. What you need is to leave. Sarah, please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She should hang up. She should call the police. She should do anything except open that door. But she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid of a man who had already done his worst. 5 minutes, she said. Then you're gone. She met him on the porch. Daniel looked terrible, thinner than she'd ever seen him. Dark circles under his eyes. His expensive coat was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Good, Sarah thought. I was wrong, he said immediately. I know that now. Leaving like that the note, it was cowardly. It was cruel. It was both. He ran a hand through his hair. I panicked. When you told me about the baby, something in me I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could see was my father. Sarah frowned. Daniel never talked about his father. He left my mother when I was 4, Daniel continued. Just walked out one day. No note, no goodbye. She spent my whole childhood telling me I was just like him, that one day I'd abandon someone too. So you decided to prove her right. Daniel flinched. I decided to prove her wrong. I convinced myself that leaving before the baby was born was different. That if I wasn't there from the start, I couldn't abandon anyone. I couldn't become him. Sarah shook her head slowly. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I know, his voice cracked. I've been seeing a therapist since I left. She helped me realize that running is just another form of abandonment. That I became my father the moment I walked out that door. What do you want from me, Daniel? Forgiveness, absolution? I want... He stopped, started again. I want to know if there's any chance, any possibility, of being part of this child's life. Sarah looked at him. Really looked for the first time since he'd arrived. She saw fear. She saw regret. She saw a man standing at a crossroads, finally ready to face the direction he should have chosen all along. But she also saw the note on the counter, the unanswered phone calls, the lawyer's letter about relinquishing parental rights. Some things couldn't be fixed with a midnight apology. You can send letters, she said finally, to the baby, after she's born. I'll decide if she reads them when she's old enough. That's it. That's all I can offer right now. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. You walked away, Daniel. You made a choice. This is the consequence. I'm not asking to come back. I'm not asking to be a family. I'm just asking for a chance. Sarah nodded. I know, and maybe someday I can give you one, but not tonight. Not like this. She turned toward the door. Sarah. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She paused, hand on the doorknob. I know you are. Then she went inside and locked the door behind her. She didn't look back to see if he left. The next morning, Eleanor found her on the porch watching the sun rise over the mountains. He came, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. He came. He apologized. He left. And Sarah took a deep breath. The air was cold, sharp, clean. It filled her lungs like a promise. And now I know what I have to do. She turned to face Eleanor. I'm staying. I'm going to fix this house. I'm going to raise my daughter here. I'm going to find whatever else my mother left for me to find. Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since Sarah had arrived, she looked genuinely happy. The attic, she said. That's where the rest of it is. That's where your mother kept her secrets. Sarah looked up at the house at the windows that seemed to glow in the morning light. Then I guess I better start climbing. The attic stairs groaned under Sarah's weight as she climbed each step, a negotiation between old wood and pregnant belly. Eleanor had offered to come with her, but Sarah had refused. Whatever waited above, she needed to face it alone. The trapdoor stuck at first. Sarah pushed harder, feeling the muscles in her arms strain, until finally the hinges gave way with a screech of rusted metal. Dust rained down, catching in her hair and throat, making her cough. She pulled herself up through the opening and froze. Her mother had turned the attic into something Sarah never expected. Not storage, not forgotten junk piled in corners. An archive. Boxes lined every wall, stacked neatly beneath the sloped ceiling, each one labeled in Margaret's careful handwriting. Sarah approached the nearest stack with trembling hands. Sarah, age 05, read the first label. She lifted the lid. Her baby bracelet lay on top, the tiny band of pink and white beads spelling out her name. Beneath it, a lock of hair sealed in a small envelope. The receipt from the hospital where she was born dated 28 years ago. A Polaroid of Margaret in the delivery room, exhausted and radiant, holding a red-faced, screaming infant. Sarah pressed the photograph to her chest. Mom, she whispered, what is all this? She opened box after box, watching herself grow up through her mother's eye. Report cards with teacher comments, macaroni art, and clay handprints. The program from her first-grade play where she'd been a singing sunflower. Every piece of evidence that Sarah Mitchell had existed, preserved and protected, and waiting. The baby kicked sharply, pulling Sarah back to the present. She pressed her hand against her belly and felt her daughter move beneath her palm. Your grandmother kept all of this for us, she said softly. She kept everything. Then she found the boxes without years. These were different, smaller. hidden behind the others pushed against the far wall as if Margaret hadn't been sure whether to include them. Sarah had to move 3 stacks to reach them, her back aching from the effort. The first was labeled simply William. Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Military medals gleamed against faded velvet. Her father's dog tags the metal worn smooth from years of handling. His discharge papers showing an honorable end to service. A letter from the VA about PTSD treatment options never opened the envelope still sealed after all these years, and at the bottom a photograph she'd never seen. Her father as a young man, smiling. Handsome in his dress uniform, his eyes bright with the kind of hope that war hadn't yet extinguished. He looked like someone Sarah might have liked to know, someone who might have taught her to ride a bike or helped with homework or walked her down the aisle someday, someone who had vanished before she could remember his face. She turned the photograph over. On the back, her mother's handwriting, William 3 months before deployment. This is the man I married. This is the man I choose to remember. Beneath the photograph lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Sarah opened it carefully, afraid it might crumble in her hands. My dearest Margaret, I'm leaving tomorrow. I can't explain why. The words won't come anymore. They haven't come since I got back. There's something wrong inside me. Something that came home from overseas and won't leave. I hear things. I see things. I'm afraid of what I might become if I stay. I'm afraid of hurting you. I'm afraid of hurting Sarah. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that her daddy wasn't always broken. That once, Antoine said once before the desert, before the blood, he was the kind of man who deserved a daughter like her. I will love you both, from whatever distance keeps you safe. William. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. He hadn't abandoned them. Not in the way she'd always believed. He'd fled from himself, from the damage the war had done, from a darkness he feared would hurt the people he loved most. It wasn't an excuse. Sarah still felt the old anger, the old wound of growing up without a father. But it was an explanation, a context, a humanity she'd never granted him. You never told me, she said to her mother's ghost. All those years you let me hate him, and you never told me the truth. The house creaked around her, a beam settling, a joist adjusting to the cold, but it sounded almost like an answer, like a voice trying to speak through wood and nail and time. Sarah set the letter aside and reached for the second hidden box. The label read, "For my granddaughter." Her breath caught. Inside lay baby clothes handmade with obvious care despite unsteady hands. A yellow cardigan with tiny pearl buttons. Mittens no bigger than silver dollars. A blanket crocheted in soft greens and whites. Its border decorated with tiny stars. Each item was wrapped in tissue paper. Protected. Precious. And at the bottom another letter. To my granddaughter, I will never hold you. I will never hear your first laugh or watch you take your first steps. This is the cruelest part of dying, knowing that love continues without you. But I refuse to be absent. I've left pieces of myself throughout this house. In the recipes your mother will teach you. In the photographs you'll find in every room. In the garden I planted when your mother was born, which will still be growing when you're old enough to help tend it. When your mother wraps you in this blanket, know that my arms are there too. Each stitch is a prayer. Each row is a promise. You come from strong women. Your great-grandmother survived the Depression with 3 children and no husband. I survived your grandfather and the bills and the cancer. Your mother will survive whatever brought her back to this house. And you will survive too. You will more and survive. You will flourish. Welcome to the family, little one. Your grandmother, Margaret Mitchell. P.S. The 3rd floorboard from the left in the kitchen creaks. I never fixed it on purpose. That's where I was standing when your mother took her first steps. Walk there sometimes. I'll be listening. Sarah clutched the blanket to her chest and wept. Her mother had known she was dying, had known about the baby, had spent her final weeks climbing to this attic, preparing gifts for a grandchild she would never meet, writing letters she would never send. Even death hadn't stopped her from mothering. The sound of a car engine broke through Sarah's grief. She wiped her eyes and crossed to the small attic window, peering down at the driveway. A black SUV had pulled up behind her Honda. As she watched, the door opened and a woman stepped out. Patricia, Daniel's mother. Sarah's stomach dropped. She descended from the attic as quickly as her pregnant body would allow, reaching the front door just as Patricia knocked. For a moment, Sarah considered not answering, but Patricia had already seen her car. She knew Sarah was home. Sarah opened the door. Patricia looked exactly as she always did, impeccably dressed, perfectly styled expression, carefully neutral. But something in her eyes was different, harder, more determined. May I come in, No. Patricia's lips thinned. Sarah, please. I've driven 4 hours. The least you can do is hear me out." "The least I can do is exactly what I'm doing. You raised a man who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend with a note on the counter. You don't get to come here and ask for my courtesy." "I came to apologize." Sarah laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "For what?" "For telling Daniel I was the problem. For suggesting I should have been more understanding of his needs." Patricia flinched. "I was wrong. I see that now." "Do you? Because 3 days ago you were defending him. 3 days ago you were suggesting this was somehow my fault." 3 days ago I didn't know the whole story. Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "Daniel told me what he did? How he left? The note? The lawyer? He told me everything. And I'm ashamed." The words seemed to cost Patricia something. Her perfect posture slumped slightly. "I'm ashamed of the man I raised. I'm ashamed that when he called me for advice, I told him to protect his assets instead of his family. I'm ashamed that I spent so many years teaching him to be successful that I forgot to teach him to be good." Sarah studied the older woman's face, looking for the manipulation, the angle. Patricia always had an angle. "What do you want, Patricia?" "I want to help, however I can. Money if you need it. Support if you will accept it. A relationship with my grandchild if you'll allow it." "Your grandchild?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "You mean the baby Daniel relinquished rights to?" "He's trying to undo that. The lawyer." "I don't care what the lawyer says. Daniel made his choice. He doesn't get to unmake it because his mother told him to." Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but Sarah cut her off. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in your car. You're going to drive back to Boston, and you're going to tell Daniel that if he wants to be part of this child's life, he needs to prove it. Not with lawyers, not with money, with time, with patience, with the kind of commitment he should have shown from the beginning. And if he does that, then maybe we can talk, but not now, not today. And definitely not with you standing on my mother's porch acting like an apology fixes everything." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Your mother was right about you," she said. Sarah frowned. "You knew my mother." "We spoke once. She called me after Daniel proposed to you." Patricia's expression shifted, something almost like respect entering her eyes. "She wanted to know what kind of family her daughter was marrying into. I thought she was being overprotective. Now I realize she was just being a mother." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That my son was ambitious and driven and would probably make a lot of money someday. That he came from a long line of men who put success before family." Patricia paused. "She asked me if I thought he would stay when things got hard. I told her I didn't know." Sarah's throat tightened. "What did she say?" "She said she hoped I was wrong. She said her daughter deserved someone who would stay." Patricia turned toward her car, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you find that person, whether it's Daniel or someone else. You deserve better than what my family has given you." She drove away without looking back. Sarah stood on the porch for a long time after the SUV disappeared, processing what she'd learned. Her mother had called Patricia, had tried to protect her, had seen something in Daniel that Sarah herself had been too in love to notice. "You were right, Mom," she whispered. "You were right about everything." The next few weeks passed in a blur of discovery and restoration. Sarah threw herself into the work of reclaiming the house, partly because it needed to be done and partly because it kept her mind off everything else. She patched holes in the walls, her hands learning the feel of drywall compound and sandpaper. She cleaned windows until they sparkled, letting in light that the house seemed to have forgotten existed. She sorted through her mother's belongings, separating treasures from trash, building a picture of a woman she was only now beginning to understand. Eleanor came every morning with fresh eggs and conversation, filling in the gaps that her mother's letters couldn't. She told Sarah about Margaret's life before Sarah was born, the dreams she'd had, the sacrifices she'd made, the way she'd fought to build something good from the wreckage William left behind. She wanted to be a writer, Eleanor said one morning, helping Sarah organize the kitchen cabinets. "Did you know that?" Sarah shook her head. She never mentioned it. She had notebooks full of stories, kept them hidden in the closet like they were something to be ashamed of. Eleanor smiled sadly. When you came along, she put them away. Said there wasn't time for dreaming anymore. Said being your mother was the only story that mattered. Where are they now? The notebooks. I don't know. Maybe she threw them out. Maybe they're still here somewhere. Eleanor handed Sarah a stack of plates. This house has a way of revealing things when you're ready to find them. That night, Sarah searched. She checked every closet, every drawer, every shelf she could reach. She moved furniture and looked behind it. She pulled up loose floorboards and peered into the spaces beneath. Nothing. Then she remembered the writing desk, the one with the hidden drawer where she'd found her father's letters. She returned to the desk and examined it more carefully. The drawer she'd already found was obvious now that she knew where to look, but the desk was large, ornate, full of compartments and cubbies. If there was one secret space, there might be more. It took her an hour to find the second one, a false bottom in the lowest drawer revealed only when she pressed a particular spot on the carved molding. The panel popped open with a click, and Sarah reached inside. Notebooks. A dozen of them bound in leather pages yellow with age. She pulled them out and opened the first one. Her mother's handwriting filled every page, not the careful script of the letters, but something looser, more urgent. Stories, poems, fragments of novels never finished. A whole interior life that Margaret had hidden from the world, from her daughter, from everyone. Sarah read until her eyes burned, until the words blurred, and her back ached from hunching over the desk. Her mother's voice emerged from these pages, younger, more hopeful, full of dreams that circumstance had slowly ground down. One entry dated 20 years ago stopped Sarah cold. Sarah asked about her father today. She's 7 now, old enough to wonder. I told her he went away, that sometimes people leave because they're broken inside. She asked if I was broken too. I said no. I lied. I think about William every day. Not the man who left, but the man he was before. The man who danced with me in the kitchen. The man who cried when Sarah was born. The man who held me at night and promised everything would be okay. That man died in the desert. The one who came home was someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. Someone who scared me. I should have tried harder. I should have gotten him help. I should have done something besides watch him drown. But I was young, and tired, and afraid. Now I'm just tired. Sarah closed the notebook and pressed her palms against her eyes. Her mother had been drowning too. All those years behind the smiles and the phone calls and the pretense of normalcy, Margaret Mitchell had been struggling to stay afloat. And Sarah had been too caught up in her own life to notice. The guilt threatened to swallow her whole. But then the baby kicked hard and insistent, and Sarah remembered why she was here. Not to drown in the past, but to build something new from its wreckage. That's what her mother had done. That's what all the Mitchell women had done. Bend, but never break. The community arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning in late October. Sarah was on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, when the first truck pulled into the driveway. Then another. Then a whole convoy of vehicles parking along the dirt road doors opening to release a stream of people carrying tools and lumber and casserole dishes. Eleanor emerged from the lead truck, grinning. "Surprise," she said. Sarah stared at the crowd gathering in her front yard. She recognized some faces from the funeral 3 years ago, but most were strangers. Young couples and elderly widows, teenagers in work boots, and children clutching rakes, all converging on the Victorian like an army of benevolent invaders. "What is this? This is Montpellier?" Eleanor climbed the porch steps and stood beside her. "Your mother helped every single one of these people at some point, brought soup when they were sick, watched their kids when they were working, organized the Christmas food drive every year, even when she didn't have enough for herself." "But I didn't." "You didn't have to. You're Margaret's daughter. That's enough." Eleanor squeezed her arm. "Let them help. It's what she would have wanted." The day became a blur of hammering and sawing and laughter. Tom Henderson, Eleanor's son-in-law, a contractor with hands like dinner plates, led a crew onto the roof replacing shingles that had been missing for years. Mr. Patterson from the hardware store rebuilt the porch railing, refusing payment when Sarah tried to press cash into his hands. "Your mother helped my wife through her cancer treatment," he said gruffly. "Sat with her for hours while I was at the store. Read to her. Held her hand when the pain got bad. This is nothing compared to what she gave us." Chen from the church organized the kitchen, directing a squad of women who seemed to produce endless quantities of food from thin air. Coffee and sandwiches and cookies appeared, and whenever Sarah turned around, they'd get pressed into her hands by people who knew her name even though she didn't know theirs. "You look just like her," said a young woman about Sarah's age, handing her a plate of brownies. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." "That's what everyone keeps telling me." "It's true." The woman smiled. "I'm Jessica. Your mom tutored me in math all through high school. I was failing. She spent 3 hours a week with me for free for 2 years. I graduated because of her." Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd had no idea her mother had tutored anyone, no idea she'd touched so many lives in this small town while Sarah was 200 miles away, oblivious. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me. Thank her. Jessica nodded toward the house. This place meant everything to her. She used to say it had a soul, that it remembered everyone who'd ever lived here. I thought she was just being poetic, but now, she shrugged, houses like this, they're rare. Hold on to it. By sunset, the Victorian had been transformed. The roof was whole again, the porch solid and safe. Someone had fixed the broken windows. Someone else had cleared the garden, revealing the bones of what Margaret had planted years ago. The house looked less like something dying and more like something waking up. Sarah stood in the front yard, surrounded by people who were beginning to feel like family, and cried. Happy tears, I hope, Eleanor said, appearing at her elbow. I didn't know about any of this, about who she was to this town, about what she did. She didn't want you to know. She wanted you to have your own life, your own identity. She was afraid that if you knew how much she needed you, you'd come home out of obligation. I would have come home anyway. If I'd known. Would you? Eleanor's voice was gentle but pointed. You had a boyfriend, a career, a whole life in Boston. Would you really have given that up to take care of a dying woman in Vermont? Sarah opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. The truth was she didn't know. 3 years ago, she'd been a different person. Selfish, maybe. Certainly self-absorbed. The kind of daughter who called on Sundays and sent birthday cards and convinced herself that was enough. I want to believe I would have, she said finally. That's all any of us can do. Eleanor patted her arm. Want to believe. Try to do better. That's what your mother did every day of her life. The crowd began to disperse as darkness fell, trucks pulling away with honking horns and waving hands. Sarah stood on the newly repaired porch watching the taillights disappear down the dirt road, feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The phone call came at 11 that night. Sarah was in bed, exhausted. That from the day's emotions when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it expecting Eleanor or maybe one of the volunteers with a forgotten question. The number was blocked. She answered anyway. Sarah Mitchell. A man's voice unfamiliar. Who is that? My name is Robert Chen. I'm an attorney in Burlington. He paused. I represent the estate of William Mitchell. Sarah sat up suddenly, wide awake. My father's been dead for 10 years. 11 actually, and yes, I'm aware. I've been trying to locate you since his passing, but your mother was protective. She refused to give me your contact information. Why would you need to contact me? Another pause longer this time. Ms. Mitchell, your father, left a will, and in that will he named you as his sole beneficiary. Sarah's head spun. Beneficiary of what? My father was a vagrant. He died alone in a cabin in Montana. Your father was many things, Ms. Mitchell, but he wasn't poor. Robert Chen's voice was careful, measured. Are you familiar with Mitchell Mining? No. It's a copper mining operation in Montana. Your grandfather started it in the 1950s. When he died, it passed to your father. When your father died, it passed to you. Sarah gripped the phone so hard her fingers ached. That's impossible. My mother would have told me. Your mother didn't know. Your father kept it from her along with a lot of other things. The company was managed by a trust while you were a minor, and I've been managing it since you turned 18, waiting for the chance to contact you. How much? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. How much is it worth? Robert Chen told her. The number was so large it didn't seem real. Enough to fix the house 100 times over. Enough to never worry about money again. Enough to change everything. Miss Mitchell, are you still there? I'm here. Eyes. Sarah's hand moved to her belly where the baby was kicking as if she sensed her mother's shock. I'm here. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed phone, still clutched in her hand, trying to make sense of what Robert Chen had just told her. Her father, the man who had abandoned her, the man she'd spent her whole life resenting, had left her a fortune. Not just money, a legacy, an entire company built on Montana copper waiting for her to claim it. The number kept echoing in her head. $7 million. Plus the value of the company itself, which Robert estimated at another $12 million. $19 million sitting in a trust with her name on it. She called Eleanor at midnight. This better be important, Eleanor said, her voice thick with sleep. Did you know? Know what? About my father, about the money, about any of it. Silence on the other end. Then Eleanor sighed. Come over, I'll put coffee on. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she couldn't bring herself to drink from. Eleanor sat across from her, looking older than she had just hours ago, the weight of secrets finally showing on her face. Your mother found out 2 years before she died, Eleanor said. William's lawyer contacted her first. She was still listed as next of kin from the marriage. Why didn't she tell me? Because she was afraid. Eleanor met Sarah's eyes. Afraid the money would change you. Afraid you'd go to Montana and discover who your father really was. Afraid you'd hate her for the lies she'd told. What lies? Eleanor took a long breath. William didn't just leave because of PTSD. That was part of it, but there was more. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He left because your mother asked him to. Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her. What? He was getting help, seeing doctors, taking medication. But Margaret was scared. Scared of who he might become, scared of what he might do. She told him that if he loved you, he would go, that you deserved a father who was whole, not one who was broken. No, Sarah shook her head. No, that can't be right. She wrote him letters for 20 years. She grieved him. She regretted it. Eleanor's voice cracked. Every day for the rest of her life. She thought she was protecting you, but as the years went on, she realized she'd just created a different kind of wound. A father who chose to leave is one thing. A father who was pushed away is another. Sarah pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. She lied to me. My whole life she let me believe he abandoned us, and she was the one who... She was 23 years old. Eleanor's voice sharpened. She was alone with a toddler and a husband who woke up screaming every night. A husband who sometimes didn't recognize her. A husband who once... She stopped. Once what? Eleanor closed her eyes. He hurt her, Sarah. Once? Only once? He didn't mean he was having an episode of flashback, but he put her in the hospital for 2 days. After that, she couldn't sleep in the same room with him. Couldn't let him hold you. She was terrified. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, her mind reeling. She never told me any of this. How could she? You worshipped the idea of him. The mysterious father who vanished. The romantic tragedy of it all. Eleanor reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. She wanted you to have that. A father you could imagine however you wanted. Not the real one who was too broken to stay and too proud to explain. But the money. The money was his way of apologizing. His way of taking care of you even though he couldn't be there. Eleanor squeezed her hand. William spent the last 10 years of his life building that company, working himself to death in the Montana mountains. He sent your mother a letter every year on your birthday asking about you, begging for news. She never answered. Sarah pulled her hand away. I need to go. Sarah, I need to think. She was out the door before Eleanor could finish. The drive back to the house took 5 minutes, but Sarah sat in the driveway for an hour, engine running heater blasting against the November cold. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Her father hadn't abandoned them. Her mother had sent him away. The fortune waiting in Montana wasn't a guilty conscience. It was a lifetime of love expressed the only way William Mitchell knew how. And her mother, the woman Sarah had spent 3 years mourning, whose house she was living in, whose recipes she was cooking, whose letters she was reading, like sacred texts, had lied to her. For 28 years. About everything. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. Your mother loved you. That's the only truth that matters. She threw the phone onto the passenger seat. At 3 a.m., she finally went inside. She climbed the stairs to her mother's bedroom and stood in the doorway looking at the space where Margaret Mitchell had slept and dreamed and slowly died. Why, she whispered. Why couldn't you just tell me the truth? The house creaked around her, that same sound she'd been hearing since she arrived, that settling of old wood and older memories. But tonight, it didn't sound like an answer. It sounded like an accusation. She walked to the bed and pulled back the covers, searching for something she didn't know what. Searching for proof that her mother was still the person she thought she'd known. Under the pillow, her fingers found paper. Another letter, another secret. My dearest Sarah, if you were reading this, you found out about the money, about your father, about what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did to William was wrong. I knew it was wrong, even as I did it. But I was so scared, Sarah. So young and so scared. He hurt me. I know Eleanor will tell you that she was the one who drove me to the hospital that night, but what she won't tell you is that I hurt him too. I pushed and pushed, trying to make him talk about the war, trying to fix something I didn't understand. I drove him to the edge, and when he fell over it, I blamed him for falling. I should have been patient. I should have been stronger. I should have been the wife he needed instead of the wife I wanted to be. By the time I realized my mistake, he was gone, and I was too proud to go after him, too stubborn to admit I was wrong. The letters I wrote, the ones you found, those weren't just for him. They were for me. A way to pretend I hadn't made the worst decision of my life. A way to keep him alive in some small corner of my heart. He did the same thing. Every year that letter on your birthday. Every year I threw it away without reading it. I told myself I was protecting you. The truth is I was protecting myself. I don't know if there's an afterlife. I don't know if I'll ever get to apologize to William in person, but if there is, and if I do, I want you to know what I'll say. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the fear and the pride and the lies that grew out of both. For the daughter who never knew her father. For the father who never knew his daughter. For all the years that could have been different if only I'd been brave enough to admit I was wrong. I love you, Sarah. That was never a lie. Mom. Sarah read the letter 5 times. Then she put it down, walked to the bathroom, and threw up until there was nothing left. The lawyer arrived in Montpelier 3 days later. Robert Chen was younger than Sarah expected, mid-40s, with graying temples and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from delivering life-changing news on a regular basis. He carried a briefcase full of documents and a folder thick with photographs. They met at Eleanor's house because Sarah couldn't bear to be in her mother's home right now. Every room felt like a crime scene. Every object felt like evidence of betrayal. Before we discuss the legal matters, Robert said, spreading papers across Eleanor's dining table, I want you to see something. He opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. Sarah's breath caught. It was her father, but older than in any picture she'd seen. Gray-haired, weathered, standing in front of a mine entrance with a hard hat in his hands. He was smiling, but there was something sad in his eyes. Something that looked a lot like longing. This was taken 6 months before he died, Robert said. He sent it to me with a note, said he wanted his daughter to see what he'd built for her. Sarah picked up the photograph with trembling hands. He knew about me. He knew everything. He had investigators keeping tabs on you your whole life. Your school performances, your college graduation, your move to Boston. He kept a scrapbook. Robert pulled out another item from the folder, a worn leather album. He asked me to give this to you along with everything else. Sarah opened the album. Page after page of her life, documented by a man she'd never known. Newspaper clippings from her high school swim meets, a program from her college graduation, a printed-out social media photo of her and Daniel at a restaurant, both of them smiling, oblivious to the future. And on the last page, a letter. My dearest daughter, you don't know me, and that's my fault. I could make excuses, the war, the sickness your mothers fear, but the truth is simpler than that. I was a coward. I ran when I should have stayed and fought. I've spent the last 30 years trying to make up for that, building something you could be proud of, building something that could take care of you when I couldn't. If you're reading this, I'm gone. The doctors said the lungs would get me eventually, too many years breathing mine dust, and I guess they were right. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that there wasn't a single day when I didn't think about you, when I didn't wonder who you were becoming, when I didn't wish I could see you just once just to know that you were okay. The company is yours now. Do what you want with it. Sell it, keep it, burn it to the ground. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you know the truth. Your mother didn't drive me away. I let myself be driven. I was so broken, so convinced that I'd hurt you like I hurt her, that I convinced myself. Myself leaving was the brave thing to do. It wasn't. It was the easiest thing, and I've regretted it every day since. I love you, Sarah. I loved you before you were born when your mother told me she was pregnant, and I cried for 3 hours straight. I loved you when I held you for the first time and you grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. I loved you when I left, even though leaving meant losing you forever. Be happy, be strong, be better than I was. Your father, William Mitchell. Sarah closed the album. I need a minute, she said. She walked outside into Eleanor's garden, November wind cutting through her sweater, and stood among the dead flowers with her father's words echoing in her head. He had loved her. All those years he had loved her. And both of her parents had let pride and fear and stubbornness destroy any chance of her knowing that love. She pressed her hand to her belly, where her daughter was kicking. I won't do this to you, she whispered. Whatever happens, whoever your father turns out to be, I won't lie to you. I won't hide things. I won't let fear win. The baby kicked harder as if in agreement. When Sarah went back inside, her face was dry, but her resolve was steel. Tell me everything, she said to Robert Chen. Every detail, every asset, everything he left me. Robert nodded and began to talk. The inheritance was larger than the initial phone call had suggested. Besides the mining company and the cash in the trust were to create, William had owned property, a cabin in Montana, a small apartment building in Billings, several parcels of undeveloped land that had appreciated significantly over the years. There were also stocks, bonds, and a life insurance policy that had been waiting to be claimed since his death. Total value $23 million. The company is profitable, Robert explained. It's been well managed for the past decade. You can continue to collect dividends without any involvement, or you can take a more active role. That's entirely up to you. What do you recommend? Robert hesitated. That depends on what you want your life to look like. If you want to stay here in Vermont, raise your child in your mother's house, the passive income alone will more than support you. If you want something different, a career involvement in the business, that's possible too. Sarah looked down at the papers spread across the table, documents that represented her father's life work. His apology made tangible. I want to see it, she said. The mine, the cabin, everything. That can be arranged. Not now, she touched her belly. After the baby comes. But I want to see where he spent his life. I want to understand who he became. Robert nodded. I'll set it up whenever you're ready. After he left, Eleanor sat down across from Sarah with 2 cups of tea. What are you thinking? Sarah laughed, a strange sound caught somewhere between hysteria and genuine amusement. I'm thinking that a month ago I was homeless and pregnant and alone. I had $47 to my name. I thought my life was over. And now? Now I'm still pregnant, still alone more or less, but I have a house and a fortune and enough family secrets to fill a library. She shook her head. It's too much, all of it. It's like the universe decided to dump everything on me at once. Maybe it did. Eleanor sipped her tea. Or maybe this is just how life works. Everything happens at once, or nothing happens at all. The trick is not getting crushed by the weight of it. How do I do that? One day at a time. One decision at a time. One breath at a time. Eleanor reached across and squeezed Sarah's hand. Your mother did it. Your grandmother did it. You'll do it too. The next few weeks brought a fragile kind of peace. Sarah returned to her mother's house. She couldn't think of it as her house not yet, and threw herself into nesting. She painted the nursery the same shade of green she'd seen in her grandmother's photographs. She assembled the crib that Eleanor's son-in-law had built from reclaimed barnwood. She washed and folded the baby clothes her mother had made, marveling at each tiny garment. The money sat untouched in the trust. Sarah wasn't ready to deal with it yet, wasn't ready to decide what it meant or what to do with it. For now, it was enough to know it was there. A safety net she'd never had before. Daniel called twice. She didn't answer. He sent flowers, which she gave to Eleanor. He sent a letter, which she read once and then burned in the fireplace. I made a mistake, he had written. I see that now. Please let me make it right. But some mistakes couldn't be unmade with pretty words and apologies. Some bridges once burned stayed burned. Thanksgiving arrived with a snowstorm. Sarah woke to a world transformed. The Vermont hills buried under 2 feet of powder, the roads impassable, the silence so complete it felt like being wrapped in cotton. She stood at the window of her mother's bedroom, hand on her belly, watching the snow fall and thinking about all the Thanksgivings she'd spent in Boston with Daniel's family. The formal dinners, the careful conversations, the constant feeling that she was performing rather than participating. This year, semester would be different. At noon, the power went out. Sarah was in the kitchen attempting her mother's recipe for pumpkin pie when the lights flickered and died. She stood in sudden darkness, batter dripping from her whisk, and felt the first flutter of panic. No power meant no heat. No heat in this storm could be dangerous, especially for a pregnant woman alone. She found her phone and called Eleanor. No answer. She tried the general emergency line. Busy. She tried Eleanor again. Still nothing. The house was already growing cold, the November chill seeping through walls that were better than they'd been, but still not perfect. Sarah grabbed blankets from the bedroom and made a nest on the couch in front of the fireplace. She had wood. Tom Henderson had delivered a cord last week, and she knew how to start a fire. She could survive this. She would survive this. By 3 p.m. the fire was roaring, but the rest of the house was freezing. Sarah huddled under blankets, sipping tea she'd heated over the flames, and tried not to think about what would happen if the power stayed out overnight. At 4 p.m. someone knocked on the door. Sarah's heart leaped. She struggled to her feet, blankets falling away, and hurried to the entrance. It wasn't Eleanor. Daniel stood on the porch covered in snow, looking half frozen and completely exhausted. Before you slam the door, he said quickly, I just drove 4 hours through a blizzard because Eleanor called me. She said you might need help. She said the power was out and she couldn't get to you. Sarah stared at him. Eleanor called you. She still had my number from when we were together. She said..." He took a shaky breath. "She said you were alone and pregnant and stubborn and someone needed to check on you." Sarah wanted to be angry, wanted to slam the door in his face and prove that she didn't need him, didn't need anyone, but she was cold and scared, and the baby was kicking in a way that felt urgent, demanding. "5 minutes, she said. "Get warm, then we talk." She stepped back to let him in. Daniel moved straight to the fire, holding his hands out to the flames, his whole body shaking with cold. Sarah watched him from across the room, arms crossed over her belly, waiting. "I shouldn't have come," he said after a moment. "I know that. You made yourself clear. Then why did you put..." "Because Eleanor asked, and because..." He turned to face her. "Because I've been thinking about what you said, about proving myself, about showing up. This isn't what I meant. I know, but it's a start, isn't it?" He ran a hand through his wet hair. "I'm not asking to stay. I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know that I can be here when it matters, that I can show up." Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd spent weeks convincing herself that Daniel was gone for good, that she was better off without him. And now here he was, half frozen and desperate, looking at her with eyes that held something she'd never seen before. Fear, real fear, not of commitment, but of losing her entirely. "The power might be out all night," she said finally. "The couch pulls out into a bed." "Sarah, don't read into it. It's practical. 2 people can keep warmer than one, and I'm not letting you drive back in this storm." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." They spent the evening by the fire, not touching, barely talking. Daniel found more wood and built the fire higher. Sarah made soup from cans she'd found in the pantry. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling flames and the wind howling outside. At 10 p.m. the contractions started. Sarah felt the first one like a fist closing around her middle, tight, insistent wrong. Too early. She was only 34 weeks. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another 6 weeks. "Sarah?" Daniel's voice came from far away. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Something's happening." She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the muscles tighten beneath her palm. "Something's..." Another contraction hit stronger than the first. "We need to get you to a hospital," Daniel said, already on his feet. "The roads?" "I don't care about the roads." He was pulling on his coat, grabbing his keys, his face pale with terror. "We're going, now." The drive should have taken an hour. It took 3. Daniel drove through snowdrifts and around fallen branches, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Sarah lay in the back seat, timing contractions, trying to breathe through the pain. They were coming faster now, every 5 minutes, every 4, every 3. "Almost there," Daniel kept saying. "Almost there, Sarah. Hold on." They reached the hospital at 2 a.m. Sarah was rushed into a room, surrounded by nurses and machines. Daniel hovering in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to stay. A doctor appeared, young, calm, with steady hands and a reassuring voice. 34 weeks is early, but not dangerous, she said. "We're going to try to stop the labor, give the baby more time. But if we can't, you should know that babies born at this stage usually do very well." Usually, the word hung in the air like a threat. "Is she going to be okay?" Daniel asked from the doorway. "The baby, is she going to be okay?" The doctor glanced at him, then at Sarah. "Is he the father?" Sarah hesitated. She thought about everything Daniel had done, Theodore news, the abandonment, the cowardice, the note on the counter that had shattered her world. She thought about the past few weeks, the apologies, the attempts to make things right. She thought about the drive through the blizzard, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd shown up when it mattered. "Yes," she said, "he's the father." Daniel's face crumpled with something that looked like relief and gratitude and 100 other emotions he couldn't name. "Then you can stay," the doctor said. "Both of you need to stay calm. Stress isn't good for the baby." The next 12 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. The medication worked slowly, painfully, but it worked. The contractions spaced out, then stopped. The baby's heartbeat stayed strong and steady on the monitor. By 2 p.m., the doctor declared the immediate crisis over. "We want to keep you for observation," she said. "A few days at least. But it looks like your daughter decided to stay put for now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." After the doctor left, Daniel pulled a chair up to Sarah's bedside. "I know this isn't the right time," he said quietly, "and I know I don't have any right to ask, but can I stay not with you, not as your boyfriend or partner or anything else, just here, until you're ready to go home?" Sarah looked at him. Really looked for the first time since he'd appeared on her porch in the snowstorm. He looked exhausted, scared, older than she'd ever seen him. He looked, she realized, exactly how she felt. "You can stay," she said. He nodded and settled back in the chair, not touching her, not speaking, just present. And for the first time in months, Sarah didn't feel quite so alone. The days in the hospital passed slowly. Eleanor came as soon as the roads cleared, bringing homemade cookies and 1,000 questions. She cried when she saw Sarah in the hospital bed, cried harder when she heard about the early labor, and cried hardest of all when Sarah told her that Daniel had stayed. "I called him because you needed help," Eleanor said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I didn't expect—" "Neither did I." "Does this mean—" "It doesn't mean anything, not yet." Sarah watched Daniel through the window of her room, where he was pacing the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. "He showed up. That's all I know. That's all I'm willing to know right now." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud of you." Sarah thought about everything she'd learned in the past weeks. The lies, the secrets, the complicated truth of who Margaret Mitchell really was. "I'm not sure my mother would understand any of this." "She'd understand, love," Eleanor said firmly. Whatever else she got wrong, she understood that. She loved you more than anything in this world. More than her pride. More than her fear. More than her own life. Sarah's hand moved to her belly, where her daughter was moving again, strong, persistent, alive. "I think I'm starting to understand that, too." 3 days after Thanksgiving, Sarah came home from the hospital. Daniel drove her back through roads that had finally been cleared. Neither of them speaking much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with everything that remained unsaid. He carried her bag to the porch, set it down by the door, and stood there with his hands in his pockets like a teenager waiting to be dismissed. "You don't have to stay," Sarah said. "I know. I'm serious. Eleanor is right next door. The community has been checking on me. I'm not alone." "I know that too." Daniel shifted his weight. "But I was wondering, there's a motel in town, the one by the gas station. I thought maybe I could stay there for a while, just in case." Sarah studied his face. He looked different than he had before, softer somehow. All the sharp edges worn down by the past few days. "Why, what?" "Because I want to be here. Not in your house, not in your life, unless you want me there. Just clothes, available, in case something happens. And your job, your life in Boston." "I quit." He said it simply, like it was nothing. 2 weeks ago, I've been staying with my mother trying to figure out what to do next." Sarah felt her eyebrows rise. "You quit your job." "I hated that job. I've hated it for years. I only stayed because—" He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter why. The point is, I'm free now. I can be wherever I want to be, and I want to be here." She should have said no, should have sent him back to Boston, back to his mother, back to the life he'd chosen when he walked out. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of doing everything alone. Tired of pretending she didn't miss him even after everything he'd done. "The motel is expensive," she said finally. "There's a spare room upstairs, the one that used to be my grandmother's." Daniel's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "No." Sarah unlocked the door and pushed it open. "But I'm tired of being sure about things. Come inside. We'll figure it out." The first week was awkward. They moved around each other like strangers sharing a subway car, careful not to touch. Careful not to intrude. Daniel took the grandmother's room at the far end of the hall, keeping his door closed, his presence minimal. He cooked meals she didn't ask for, fixed things she hadn't noticed were broken, disappeared for hours at a time to give her space. Sarah watched him from a distance, trying to reconcile this man with the one who had left a note on the counter and walked away. They seemed like different people. Maybe they were. On the 8th day, she found him in the attic. She'd gone up to get more of her mother's boxes. She was still working through them, still discovering secrets, and there he was, sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor, reading something by the light of the single bare bulb. "What are you doing up here?" Daniel looked up, startled. In his hands was one of her mother's notebooks, the ones filled with stories and poems and fragments of dreams. "I'm sorry," he said, quickly starting to close it. "I shouldn't have—" "How did you find those?" "I was looking for extra blankets. The closet up here had a false bottom, and I—" He stopped. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy." Sarah crossed the attic and sat down beside him. She took the notebook from his hands and looked at the page he'd been reading. Her mother's handwriting cramped and urgent. "She wanted to be a writer," Sarah said. "Did you know that—" "No?" "Neither did I, not until I found these." She flipped through the pages slowly. "She gave it up when I was born. Said there wasn't time for dreaming anymore. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Do you think she was happy? Sarah considered the question. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. Her mother had seemed happy, content, at least in her small life in her small town. But now, knowing what she knew about William, about the lies, about the dreams that had been abandoned, she wasn't sure anymore. I think she made herself happy, she said finally. I think she took what she had and convinced herself it was enough. Is that the same thing? I don't know. Sarah closed the notebook. I used to think so. Now I'm not sure about anything. Daniel reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since the hospital, and Sarah felt the contact like an electric shock. I'm sorry, he said. Not just for leaving, for all of it. For not being the person you needed me to be. Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers. Who did you think I needed you to be? Successful, impressive, someone your friends would envy. He laughed bitterly. That's all I ever thought about how things looked. How I looked. I never stopped to ask if you were happy. I wasn't, Sarah admitted. Not really. I kept waiting for something to change for us to become the couple I'd imagined we'd be. But we never did. We could now. Sarah pulled her hand away. It's too soon for that. I know. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying. Daniel took a breath. I'm different now. Or I'm trying to be. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if anything will ever be enough. But I'm trying. Sarah stood up and brushed the dust from her clothes. Keep trying, she said. We'll see. The second week brought December, and with it the first anniversary of her mother's diagnosis. Sarah discovered the date by accident flipping through her mother's calendar while looking for a recipe. December 8th was circled in red, with 2 words written in the margin, "It begins." She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at those words. 1 year ago, her mother had sat in a doctor's office and learned that she was dying. 1 year ago, the countdown had started, the treatments, the bills, the slow decline that Sarah had known nothing about. 1 year ago, Margaret Mitchell had begun the process of saying goodbye to a daughter who wasn't listening. Eleanor found her there at noon, still staring at the calendar. I should have been here, Sarah said. When she got the diagnosis, I should have been with her. She didn't want you to be. I know, but I should have insisted. I should have pushed. Eleanor sat down across from her. Your mother was the most stubborn woman I ever knew. When she decided something, that was it. There was no pushing Margaret Mitchell. She got that from her mother, the stubbornness. And you got it from her. Eleanor smiled sadly. The Mitchell women have always been like that, proud to a fault, afraid to ask for help even when they're drowning. Sarah touched her belly, where the baby was moving. I don't want to be like that. I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking she has to do everything alone. Then don't be. Eleanor reached across and squeezed her hand. You have a choice, Sarah. You can repeat the patterns or you can break them. Your mother couldn't break them. She was too damaged by her own past. But you can. How? By being honest, by letting people in, by admitting when you need help. Eleanor paused. By forgiving the people who hurt you even when it's hard. Sarah knew Eleanor wasn't just talking about her mother. That night she went to Daniel's room. He was sitting on the bed reading one of the books from her mother's shelf. He looked up when she knocked, surprise flickering across his face. Can we talk? Of course. He set the book aside and made room for her on the bed. Sarah didn't sit. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her belly, trying to find the words she'd practiced all afternoon. I've been thinking about what you said, about trying to be different. Okay? And I've been thinking about my parents, about the choices they made, about how fear and pride destroyed any chance they had at happiness. Daniel waited, not speaking. I don't want to be like them, Sarah said. I don't want to spend my life holding on to anger because it's easier than forgiveness. I don't want my daughter to grow up wondering why her parents couldn't figure out how to love each other. What are you saying? Sarah took a deep breath. I'm saying I want to try. Not go back to what we were that's gone, and it should be gone. But something new, something better. If you're willing? Daniel stood up slowly. I'm willing. I've been willing since the moment I walked away and realized what I'd lost. It won't be easy. I know. I'm still angry. Part of me might always be angry. I know that too. And if you leave again, if you run when things get hard, I won't. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close but not touching. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise I'll stay. Whatever happens, I'll stay." Sarah looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her across a crowded bar 8 years ago, the same eyes that had watched her sleep on lazy Sunday mornings, the same eyes that had avoided hers when he'd packed his bags and walked out. She saw fear there now, real fear, but also hope. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we try." She finally let herself smile. "But you're still sleeping in the grandmother's room." Daniel laughed a real laugh, the first she'd heard from him in months. "I can live with that." The third week of December brought a visitor neither of them expected. Sarah was in the kitchen attempting a complicated recipe from her mother's book when she heard tires on the gravel driveway. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. A sedan had pulled up behind Daniel's car. As Sarah watched, a woman got out, middle-aged, well-dressed, with dark hair going gray at the temples. She stood looking at the house for a long moment, then squared her shoulders and walked toward the porch. Sarah met her at the door. "Can I help you?" The woman's eyes widened slightly, taking in Sarah's pregnant belly, her flour-dusted apron, her defensive posture. "You must be Sarah," she said. "I'm Catherine Mitchell." Sarah felt the name hit her like a physical blow. "Mitchell, your father's sister." Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Your aunt." Sarah gripped the doorframe. "I didn't know my father had a sister." "He didn't talk about his family much, even before the war." Catherine attempted to smile. "May I come in? There are things I need to tell you, things I should have told you years ago." Sarah stepped back, her mind racing. "How did you find me?" "Robert Chen told me you'd inherited William's estate. I asked him where you were staying." Catherine followed her into the house, looking around with something like recognition. "This place hasn't changed much. Your mother always kept it exactly the way it was. You've been here before. Once, years ago, before you were born." Catherine sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. "William brought me here to meet Margaret. He was so proud of this house, so proud of the life he was building." Daniel appeared in the doorway, drawn by the voices. "Everything okay?" "This is my aunt," Sarah said. The word felt strange in her mouth. "Apparently." Catherine looked at Daniel with curious eyes. "The father? That's complicated." "It usually is." Catherine turned back to Sarah. "I owe you an explanation. Several explanations, actually. But first, I need to tell you about your father. The real story, not the version your mother told you." Sarah sat down across from her. "I'm listening," Catherine began. "William was the golden child. Our parents' favorite, the one who could do no wrong. When he enlisted, they were so proud their son serving his country. When he came back, they didn't know what to do with him. The PTSD. It wasn't called that then. Shell shock, they called it. Or they didn't call it anything. They just pretended nothing was wrong." Catherine's voice hardened. "Our parents threw money at the problem. Doctors' medications, private hospitals. Nothing helped. William kept getting worse. My mother said he hurt her. He did, once, and he never forgave himself for it." Catherine paused. "But what your mother didn't tell you is what happened after. William called me that night sobbing, begging me to help him. He wanted to get better. He wanted to be the husband and father he'd promised to be. What did you do?" "I found him a program. A veterans facility in Montana, one of the best in the country. I convinced him to go. He was there for 2 years, working on himself, learning to control the demons." Catherine's eyes glistened. "And the whole time he wrote to your mother, every week, begging her to wait for him, begging her to let him try again." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She never mentioned any letters. "She sent them back, unopened, every single one." Catherine pulled an envelope from her purse and set it on the table. "I found these in William's things after he died. He kept them all. Returned to sender in your mother's handwriting." Sarah picked up the envelope. Her mother's script was unmistakable, the same loops and curves that filled the recipe book, the journals, the letters she'd written to a dead man for 20 years. "Return to sender. No forwarding address." "She told me she wrote to him," Sarah said slowly. "She told me she kept writing even after he died." "She did, but only after she was sure he couldn't write back." Catherine's voice was gentle but unsparing. "Your mother loved your father, I believe that, but she loved her fear more. She was so afraid he would hurt her again that she never gave him the chance to prove he'd changed." Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated 23 years ago. "My dearest Margaret, 6 months clean, 6 months without an episode. The doctors say I'm making progress, real progress this time. I know you're scared. I know I gave you reason to be. But I'm not the man who hurt you anymore. I'm becoming someone new, someone better. Please let me come home. Please let me see my daughter. I dream about her every night. Her laugh, her smile, the way she used to grab my finger and not let go. I miss you both so much, it feels like dying. Please, William. Sarah set the letter down. She never gave him a chance? No, and by the time she might have been ready to, it was too late. William had given up. He moved to Montana permanently, threw himself into building the mining company, and never tried to contact her again. But the birthday letters, those started years later, after his therapist convinced him that he needed closure even if Margaret never responded. He wrote them knowing she would never read them. Catherine reached across and took Sarah's hand. Your father spent the last 10 years of his life waiting for a door that never opened. He died still loving a woman who refused to forgive him. Sarah's tears fell onto the table, splashing against the faded envelope. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. All of it. Not just your mother's version, not just your father's version, but the whole messy, complicated truth. Catherine squeezed her hand. And because I don't want you to make the same mistakes they did. She glanced at Daniel, who had been standing silent in the doorway throughout. Whatever happened between you two, whatever he did, don't let fear make your decisions for you. Don't wake up 20 years from now realizing you threw away something that could have been saved. Sarah looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first crack in a wall that had been building for months. I should go, Catherine said, standing. I'm staying at the motel in town for a few days. If you want to talk more about William, about the family, about anything, I'm here. Wait. Sarah stood too, her belly making the movement awkward. You said there were things you should have told me years ago. Why didn't you? Catherine paused at the door. Your mother asked me not to. After William died, she called me, the only time we ever spoke. She said she wanted you to have a clean slate, a fresh start, without the weight of Mitchell family history dragging you down. And you agreed? I did. I thought she knew best. She was your mother after all. Catherine's smile was sad. But now, seeing you here, seeing what she left you to find on your own, I realize I was wrong. Some histories can't be escaped. They can only be understood. She walked out into the December cold. Sarah watched her drive away, then turned to Daniel. Did you know any of that? No. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, the first time he'd held her since before everything fell apart. I didn't know any of it. Sarah let herself lean into him. Let herself feel for just a moment like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. My whole life is a lie, she whispered. Everything I thought I knew about my parents, about myself. It's not a lie, it's just more complicated than you thought. Daniel stroked her hair. Isn't everything... The baby kicked hard as if to remind them both that complications were just beginning. Sarah pulled back and wiped her eyes. I need to think about all of this, about what it means. Take all the time you need. Daniel released her reluctantly. I'll be here. She went upstairs to her mother's room and sat on the bed where Margaret had slept and dreamed and slowly died. She thought about fear, about pride, about the way love could curdle into something else when it wasn't tended. She thought about her daughter growing inside her, already inheriting a legacy of secrets and pain. And she made a decision. She picked up her phone and called Catherine. I want to know everything, she said. About my father, about the family, about all of it. Catherine's voice was warm with relief. Come to the motel tomorrow. I'll tell you everything I know. Sarah hung up and placed her hand on her belly. We're going to break the pattern, she told her daughter. Whatever it takes, we're going to do better. The baby kicked once more as if in agreement. Outside, the December wind howled around the old Victorian, rattling windows and creaking beams. But inside, for the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah felt something like peace. Not the peace of answers, she had more questions now than ever. The peace of choosing. Of deciding finally to face the truth instead of running from it. Her mother had run. Her father had run. Even Daniel had run. Sarah was done running. Whatever came next, she would face it standing still. Catherine's story took 3 days to tell. They met at the motel each morning, Sarah driving through fresh snow while Daniel stayed behind to work on the house. Catherine had brought boxes of her own photographs, letters, documents that painted a picture of the Mitchell family Sarah had never known existed. Her grandfather had been a hard man, Catherine explained. A self-made millionaire who believed weakness was a choice. When William came home from the war damaged and struggling, their father had seen it as a personal failure. He'd cut William off financially, told him to pull himself together, refused to acknowledge that his golden son had become something broken. That's why William never talked about his family, Catherine said on the second day. He was ashamed, not of what the war did to him, but of how our father reacted to it. What about your mother? She did what women of her generation did. She followed her husband's lead. Catherine's voice was bitter. She loved William, but she loved her marriage more. When Dad said William was dead to us, she went along with it. Sarah thought about her own mother making similar choices for similar reasons. Fear wearing the mask of love. Did you stay in touch with him? I tried. For years I tried. But William pushed everyone away after Margaret rejected him. He said he was done with family, done with hope. He just wanted to work. Catherine pulled out a photograph of William in his 50s standing in front of the mine, looking weathered and tired. The company became his whole life, his way of proving he was worth something even if no one was watching. But he was watching me, always. Every birthday, every milestone. He had investigators send reports, photographs, updates. He knew about your first boyfriend, your college graduation, your move to Boston. Catherine smiled sadly. He even knew about Daniel. He wasn't happy about that, by the way. Said the man had runner written all over him. Sarah laughed despite herself. He wasn't wrong. Your father was rarely wrong about people. He just couldn't apply that insight to himself. On the third day, Catherine brought the final box. These are William's personal effects, she said, setting it on the motel bed. The things they found in his cabin after he died. I thought you should have them. Sarah opened the box with trembling hand. On top lay a photograph she'd never seen her parents' wedding day. Margaret in a simple white dress, William in his dress uniform, both of them young and radiant and impossibly hopeful. They were looking at each other like the rest of the world didn't exist. Beneath the photograph was a ring box. Sarah opened it and found a simple gold band worn thin from years of handling. He wore it every day, Catherine said. Even after Margaret sent back his letters. Even after she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. He never took it off. Sarah slipped the ring onto her own finger. It was too big, but she didn't care. He really loved her. He really did. And she really loved him. That's the tragedy of it. They loved each other, but they couldn't figure out how to be together. Fear and pride and bad timing destroyed what could have been a beautiful life. Sarah looked at the ring, at the photograph, at the boxes full of evidence that her parents' story was far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. I don't want that for my daughter, she said. I don't want her to grow up wondering what could have been. Then don't let her. Catherine reached across and squeezed her hand. You have a chance to break the pattern. Your parents couldn't do it, maybe you can. That night, Sarah showed Daniel everything. They sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by photographs and letters and the accumulated debris of 3 generations of Mitchell family history. Daniel listened without interrupting as Sarah walked him through it all. The wedding, the war, the breakdown, the letters returned but unopened, the years of silence and regret. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking about my own family, my father who left, my mother who spent my whole childhood telling me I was just like him. Daniel picked up the wedding photograph and studied it. I always assumed I was destined to repeat his mistakes. That abandonment was in my blood. Do you still believe that? I don't know. He set the photograph down. But I know I don't want to. I know I want to be different. Sarah reached out and took his hand. Then be different. It's a choice, Daniel. Every day it's a choice. He looked at her with something like wonder. How did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. Sarah touched her belly, where the baby was moving. Several good teachers, actually, even the ones who made mistakes. Daniel leaned forward and kissed her forehead. I love you, he said. I should have said that more when we were together. I should have said it every day. You can start now. I love you. He kissed her again, her cheek this time. I love you. Her other cheek. I love you. Finally, her lips. Sarah kissed him back, and for the first time in months it felt right. Christmas Eve arrived with a snowstorm. The weather forecasters had predicted flurries, but what came was something else entirely, a wall of white that descended on Vermont like a curtain falling on a stage. By noon, the roads were impassable. By evening, the power had flickered twice. By midnight, Sarah was having contractions. It's too early, she gasped, gripping the kitchen counter as another wave of pain rolled through her. I'm only 36 weeks. Early, but not dangerous, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice calm even as his hands shook. That's what the doctor said. Babies born at 36 weeks are usually fine. Usually? Sarah laughed through the pain. I'm so tired of that word. Daniel grabbed his phone and called the hospital. The conversation was brief and not encouraging. The roads were closed, ambulances couldn't get through, and they were advising people to shelter in place unless it was a true emergency. Is labor an emergency? Daniel asked. How far apart are the contractions? He looked at Sarah. Every 15 minutes. Then you have time. Call us back when they're 5 minutes apart. Daniel hung up and turned to Sarah with forced confidence. We have time. Time for what? A miracle. Time to figure this out. He helped her to the couch and covered her with blankets. Eleanor, I'm calling Eleanor. Eleanor answered on the first ring. The baby. How did you know, dumb? I've been watching the storm and praying it wouldn't happen tonight. A pause. I can't drive in this, Daniel. The roads between our houses are completely buried. Then walk, please. Sarah needs you. I'm 78 years old. If I try to walk half a mile through a blizzard, you'll have 2 emergencies instead of 1. Daniel's composure cracked. What do? I don't know how to deliver a baby. I don't know. You listen to me. Eleanor's voice was steel. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Most of them didn't have hospitals or doctors. Sarah's body knows what to do. Your job is to support her. That's all. But what if something goes wrong? Then you deal with it. But don't borrow trouble. Right now, Sarah needs you calm and present. Can you do that? Daniel looked at Sarah, who was breathing through another contraction, her face pale but determined. Yes, he said. I can do that. Good. I'm going to stay on the phone with you. Put me on speaker. The next 6 hours were the longest of Daniel's life. Sarah's contractions grew closer together every 12 minutes, then every 10, then every 8. Eleanor talked them through each one, her voice a steady anchor in the chaos. She told Sarah when to breathe, when to push back against the urge to panic, when to let her body take over. At 3 a.m., the power went out. Daniel found candles in the kitchen, the same ones Sarah had used her first night in the house, and lit them throughout the living room. The flickering light made everything feel ancient and sacred, like they'd stepped back in time. To an era when birth and death, and everything between, happened at home surrounded by family. At 4 a.m., Sarah's water broke. The contractions are going to intensify now, Eleanor warned through the phone. Daniel, you need to prepare. Get clean towels, warm water, something to cut the cord with sterilized scissors if you have them. I can't do this, Daniel said, his voice cracking. I can't. You can. Sarah grabbed his hand, squeezing hard as another contraction hit. You can because you have to, because I need you. Daniel looked into her eyes and saw something he'd never seen before, complete trust. After everything he'd done after the abandonment and the cowardice and the note on the counter, Sarah still trusted him. He couldn't fail her again. Okay, he said. Okay, tell me what to do. At 5:17 a.m. on Christmas morning, the baby came. Sarah pushed through the final contraction, her scream echoing through the old house, and Daniel caught his daughter in trembling hands. She was small and red and furious, her cry filling the silence left by the storm, announcing her presence to a world that had no idea she was coming. She's here, Daniel whispered. Sarah, she's here. He placed the baby on Sarah's chest, and Sarah wept great heaving sobs of relief and joy and a love so overwhelming it felt like drowning. Hi, baby, she said through her tears. Hi, I'm your mama. The baby's cries softened as she found Sarah's warmth, her tiny fingers grasping at air, her eyes screwed shut against the candlelight. She's perfect, Daniel said. She's absolutely perfect. Eleanor's voice came through the phone, thick with emotion. What are you going to name her? Sarah looked down at her daughter, this impossible, miraculous, hard-won child, and knew immediately. Caroline, she said. Caroline Margaret Mitchell. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Your mother would have loved that. I know. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. That's why I chose it. The storm broke at dawn. Sarah lay on the couch, Caroline sleeping on her chest, watching the first light of Christmas morning creep through the windows. Daniel had finally stopped pacing and collapsed into the armchair beside her, one hand resting on the baby's back as if afraid she might disappear. We did it, he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. You did it. Sarah reached out and touched his face. I couldn't have done this without you. That's not true. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Strong enough to do it alone? But I didn't have to. She smiled at him. That's the difference. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Daniel jumped up, hand going automatically to protect Sarah and the baby, then relaxed when he saw Eleanor's face through the window. He opened the door, and she rushed in, still in her nightgown and boots, her coat thrown on haphazardly. "Let me see her," Eleanor demanded. "Let me see this Christmas miracle." Sarah shifted so Eleanor could look at Caroline's face. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "She looks like Margaret," Eleanor whispered. "The same nose, the same chin." "She has her grandfather's eyes," Sarah said. "My father's eyes." Eleanor looked at her sharply, surprised. "You've made peace with him." "I'm trying to, with both of them." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "They weren't perfect, they made terrible mistakes, but they loved me. In their own broken ways, they loved me." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's all any of us can do. Love imperfectly and hope it's enough." "It wasn't enough for them, but maybe," Sarah looked at Daniel, "maybe it can be enough for us." The ambulance arrived at noon after the roads had been cleared enough for emergency vehicles to pass. The paramedics checked Sarah and Caroline, declared them both healthy, and offered to transport them to the hospital for observation. "I'd rather stay home," Sarah said. "Ma'am, it's standard procedure." "This is my home. My mother died here. My daughter was born here." Sarah held Caroline closer. "I'm not leaving." The paramedics exchanged glances, then shrugged. "Your call, but if anything seems wrong, fever, excessive bleeding, trouble feeding you, call us immediately." "I will." After they left, Sarah looked around the living room, the candles still burning low, the towels piled in the corner, the evidence of the night's chaos everywhere. "We should clean up," she said. "Later." Daniel sat down beside her. "Right now, we should just be." So they sat. Sarah and Daniel and Caroline, surrounded by the ghosts of generations past, the first light of Christmas filtering through windows that had seen a century of joys and sorrows. Eleanor made breakfast. Catherine arrived at mid-afternoon, having driven through the night from Burlington when she heard the news. The house filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter, and the small, insistent cries of a newborn demanding attention. At sunset, Sarah climbed the stairs to her mother's room. Caroline was sleeping in the bassinet Eleanor had brought over, the same bassinet Margaret had used for Sarah 30 years ago. The sight of it made Sarah's chest ache with a grief that had finally found its proper shape. She pulled the last of her mother's letters from the nightstand drawer, the one she'd been saving, the one labeled "Read after the baby comes." "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've done it. You've brought new life into this old house. I wish I could be there. I wish I could hold my grandchild and tell her all the stories I never told you, about my dreams about your father, about the choices I made and the ones I should have made differently. But since I can't, I'll say this. You are enough. Whatever you're feeling right now, the fear, the doubt, the overwhelming weight of responsibility, know that you are enough. You have everything you need to be a good mother. Not a perfect mother. There's no such thing but a good one. A loving one. That's all that matters in the end. Love. I didn't always show it well. I kept secrets I shouldn't have kept. I held grudges I should have released. I let fear make too many of my decisions. But I loved you. From the moment I felt you move inside me, I loved you with everything I had. Carry that love forward. Give it to your daughter. Let it be the foundation of everything you build. And forgive me. Please. Not for my sake I'll be beyond caring about such things, but for yours. Forgiveness is freedom. Don't let my mistakes become chains that hold you back. I love you, Bertie. Forever and always, Mom. Sarah pressed the letter to her heart and wept. She wept for her mother, who had tried so hard and failed in so many ways. She wept for her father, who had loved from a distance because he couldn't figure out how to love up close. She wept for herself for the years of confusion and anger and grief that had brought her to this moment. And then she stopped. She wiped her eyes, folded the letter carefully, and walked to the bassinet where Caroline slept. "I forgive her," she said softly. "I forgive them both." The words hung in the air like a blessing, like a release. And Sarah felt something shift inside her, a weight lifting, a door opening, a new chapter beginning. She picked up her daughter and carried her downstairs, where Daniel and Eleanor and Catherine were waiting. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked. "Everything is perfect." Sarah smiled at him, at all of them. Everything is finally perfect. New Year's Eve brought one final surprise. Sarah was nursing Caroline in the living room, the old house warm and quiet around them, when the doorbell rang. Daniel answered it and returned with a confused expression. "There's a woman here," he said. "She says she knew your mother." Sarah handed Caroline to Eleanor and went to the door. A stranger stood on the porch, 60-something elegantly dressed with kind eyes and nervous hands. She was holding a box wrapped in brown paper. Sarah Mitchell. Yes? My name is Helen Porter. I was your mother's roommate in college. The woman's voice trembled slightly. I've been trying to find you since I heard about Margaret's death. There's something I need to give you. Sarah stepped aside. Come in. Helen sat in the living room, the box on her lap looking at the photographs on the mantel like they were windows into a lost world. Margaret and I lost touch after college, she explained. She got married, had you, and our lives went in different directions, but we reconnected a few years ago when she found me on the internet. She never mentioned you. She wouldn't have. This was private, a project she was working on. Helen handed Sarah the box. She asked me to hold on to this until after she was gone. She said you needed to find everything else first before you were ready for this. Sarah unwrapped the box with trembling hands. Inside was a manuscript, hundreds of pages neatly typed, bound with a simple black cover. The title read, Bending but Not Breaking the Stories of Mitchell Women. Sarah opened it and began to read. Her mother's voice emerged from the pages, not the voice of letters and recipes, but a storyteller's voice. Strong, clear, unflinching. The book told the story of 4 generations. Sarah's great-grandmother, who had survived the Depression with 3 children and no husband. Her grandmother, who had built this house with her bare hands. Margaret herself, who had loved and lost and kept going anyway. And Sarah. Her story was there, too incomplete ending mid-sentence, waiting to be finished. She was writing about us, Sarah whispered. All of us. She worked on it for years, Helen said. Every time we talked, she had more pages, more stories. She said it was the book she'd always wanted to write, the one she'd put aside when you were born. Sarah flipped to the last page. Her mother's handwriting appeared beneath the final typed paragraph. I'm leaving the rest for Sarah to finish. She'll know how the story ends. She's living it. All my love, Margaret. Sarah closed the manuscript and pressed it to her chest. She finished it, she said. After all those years, she finally finished her dream. She wanted you to have it published. Helen smiled through tears. She said the world needed to hear the stories of women who bend but never break. Sarah looked around the room at Daniel, who was holding Caroline with the careful attention of a man determined not to drop the most precious thing he'd ever held. At Eleanor, whose eyes were bright with tears. At Catherine, who had come back into the family fold after decades of distance. At Helen, a stranger connected by love to a woman who refused to be forgotten. I'll finish it, Sarah said. I'll tell our story, all of it. The clock struck midnight. Outside, fireworks erupted over the mountains, the Montpellier New Year's celebration visible from the Victorians' windows. Daniel brought Caroline to the glass so she could see the colors, even though she was far too young to understand. Sarah stood beside them, her mother's manuscript in her arms, her father's ring on her finger, her daughter's warmth filling the space between them. Happy New Year? Daniel said. Happy New Year. Sarah leaned against him, watching the fireworks paint the sky. What do you think this year will bring? I don't know, but I'm ready for it. He kissed the top of her head. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Eleanor appeared beside them. Your mother would be so proud, she said softly, of all of this, of you. I know, Sarah smiled. I can feel her here, in the walls, in the floorboards, in every creak and whisper of this old house. Houses remember, Eleanor said, this one more than most. Catherine joined them at the window. To new beginnings, she said, raising an imaginary glass. To family, Daniel added. To love, Eleanor continued. Sarah looked down at Caroline, who had fallen asleep in Daniel's arms, her tiny face peaceful, her whole life stretching ahead of her like an unwritten book. To the women who came before us, Sarah said, and to the ones who will come after. The fireworks reached their crescendo, filling the sky with light and sound and color. And in the old Victorian house on the hill, 4 generations of Mitchell women, past, present, and future, celebrated the turning of the year. Sarah walked to the kitchen counting floorboards. 1, 2, 3 from the left. She stepped down. The floor creaked beneath her weight, that same familiar sound her mother had written about. The spot where Margaret had stood watching Sarah take her first steps. The spot she'd asked Sarah to visit to remember to listen. I'm here, Mom, Sarah whispered. We're both here. The house settled around her with a sound like a sigh, like welcome, like home. And Sarah Mitchell, who had arrived pregnant and alone with nothing but $47 and a broken heart, finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her all along. Some houses are just buildings. 4 walls and a roof temporary shelter from temporary storms. But some houses are something more. They're keepers of secrets and holders of memories. They're witnesses to births and deaths and everything between. They're the physical proof that love exists, that family matters, that the stories we tell become the legacies we leave. This house had held 4 generations of Mitchell women. It had watched them struggle and suffer and survive. It had kept their secrets until they were ready to be found, and now it would hold a 5th generation. Caroline Margaret Mitchell, born on Christmas morning, heir to a fortune she didn't need, and a legacy she would spend her whole life understanding. Sarah picked up her daughter and carried her through the house one more time, past the kitchen where her mother had taught her to bake, past the living room where her parents had danced on their wedding night, past the bedroom where Margaret had written letters to a dead man for 20 years, past the attic where boxes of memories waited to be discovered by the next generation. She stopped at the front door and looked out at the Vermont mountains, white with snow glowing in the light of a new year. "This is your home," she told Caroline. "This is where you come from. These walls, these stories, these women who bent but never broke. This is your inheritance. Not the money, not the house, this. This love that survives everything. This strength that passes from mother to daughter, generation after generation." Caroline stirred in her arms, opened her eyes, and looked at Sarah with an expression that seemed far too knowing for a newborn. Sarah smiled. "Welcome home, Caroline. We've been waiting for you." In the house, the old, loyal, loving house creaked once more beneath her feet. Not a settling, not a complaint, a promise. That it would stand for another 100 years, holding the stories of Mitchell women, keeping their secrets, witnessing their lives. That it would be there when Caroline brought her own children home someday. That it would remember and protect and endure. Because that's what houses like this do. That's what love does. It stays.